Human Development, Section 1, Introduction to Lifespan Development. The essential question I have for you for this lecture, and what I want you to think about as we go over the following slides, is what factor do you think has the most influence on development? In this lecture, we're going to define the lifespan perspective. We're going to go over some of the different conceptions of age and the different types of age. We're going to review the different periods of development that we will be focusing on throughout this course. Then we'll discuss some of the issues in lifespan development, followed by the historical theories on lifespan development, and then we'll go over the contemporary theories on development, and finally we'll conclude with some of the specific types of research that are done in the field of developmental psychology. So let's start off by defining development. In psychology, human development is the period that is studied from conception until death. So we're going to define development as starting from conception, when the sperm fertilizes the egg, and concluding at death when the person takes their last breath. Development is lifelong. It does not begin at birth, and it does not end after the changes of puberty have occurred. Rather, as included in the definition that I just gave you, development is something that occurs over the entire life of the person. Development is also multidirectional. This means that throughout life, some components or dimensions of our life will grow while others will remain the same or may even shrink. Third, development is multidimensional. There are 3 dimensions or domains in development. So for each developmental period that we will be discussing, we'll be talking about the biological or physical changes, we'll talk about the cognitive changes, and then we'll also talk about the socio-emotional changes that occur in our life. Development is multidisciplinary. So although we study development in psychology, there are other types of researchers and scientists who also study development. These can include, but are not limited to, anthropologists, neuroscientists, and medical researchers. Development is characterized by plasticity. This means that there are some things in our life that have the capacity for change and growth. This is what plasticity refers to. Again, plasticity refers to the capacity for change. So we think about different skills or different abilities that we have, which remain relatively the same throughout our lifespan and which continue to grow and develop as we get older. And then finally, the last point is that development is multi-contextual. So development occurs within many different contexts or settings. These contexts can include our families, neighborhoods, schools, peers, work settings, and so forth. Each setting is influenced by historical, economic, social, and cultural factors. So these contexts are going to change over the course of our lifetime. And that means that we are individuals who are changing in a changing world. So the context that we find ourselves in will exert different types of influences on our growth. And these include normative age-graded influences. Okay. These are influences that are similar for individuals who are of a particular age group. So these influences can include the different biological processes that are occurring in this age group, but they can also include the socio-cultural or environmental processes that are occurring in this age group. So these can include things like beginning a formal education or starting a job. The next multicultural aspect of development includes the normative history-graded influences. And these are common to people of a particular generation because of specific events that are occurring as a result of the history in which the person finds themselves living. So, for example, some historical events that have influenced development over time have included the first landing of man on the moon, the invention of the personal computer, and even other types of natural disasters and tragedies that have occurred. And then finally, we have the non-normative life influences. These are unusual occurrences that occur that may be specific to an individual that have a major impact on the individual's life. These are the events that don't happen to everyone, but when they do happen, there's different ways that they can affect the person. So for example, a death of a parent when a child is very young can be an example of a non-normative life influence. Now, there can be other types of contexts that influence development. One that we will be talking about and referring to frequently during this course is socioeconomic status. So this refers to the income level of the person, where they live, and other factors that can influence the means that they have, the resources that they have, and other things that can affect development. And then there is culture. So culture refers to the behavior, patterns, beliefs, and other products of a group of people that are passed down from generation to generation. And these can include one's ethnicity, among other things. So now let's take a look at conceptions of age. The two terms that I want to go over are lifespan and life expectancy. Lifespan refers to the maximum number of years a human can expect to live. The human body is designed to live to be no more than about 120 years. So we say for humans, our lifespan is 120 years. And the reason why it is that number is because of the ability of the cells to divide so many times. There are pieces of the cells or components of the cells that are known as telomeres that play a role in cell division. They can only provide what they need to for the cells to divide so many times, and that works out to be a maximum of about 120 years. On the other hand, life expectancy refers to the number of years a person can expect to live based upon the year they were born. So life expectancy has been increasing over the last many decades, which means that a person who is born in 2020 can expect to live longer than somebody who was born in 1960. Now, this concept of the life expectancy is not a guarantee that the person will live to be that many years, but it is a guide that we use. There are many different concepts of age and many different types of ages. When we say age, we typically refer to chronological age, which is the number of years that have elapsed since our birth. Our biological age refers to how old our physical body is. If somebody takes care of themselves, if they exercise, eat good foods, if they practice healthy lifestyle choices like meditating, then their biological age could be younger than their chronological age. However, if the person makes some lifestyle choices that may not be the best, for example, not eating healthy foods, perhaps eating lots of fast food, not getting enough exercise, maybe they smoke or use drugs and alcohol, then their biological age will be much older than their chronological age. Our psychological age refers to our psychological capacity as compared to others of our age. And then our social age refers to how we relate to others as compared to other people who are in our age group. Basically, this includes our social skills and refers to whether or not our social skills are socially appropriate for someone of our age. Now, there are several different periods of development that last for a certain number of months or years. This slide shows what those different periods are and the ages that we typically consider one to be in those periods. So they include the prenatal period, infancy and toddlerhood, early childhood, middle and late childhood, adolescence, emerging adulthood, early adulthood, middle adulthood, late adulthood, and later adulthood. And I've even seen some textbooks use the term late adulthood to refer to centenarians, which are individuals over the age of 100, because more and more people are living to be over the age of 100 than ever before across the world. Developmental psychologists are adding that additional late adulthood developmental period. So now let's take a look at some of the issues in lifespan development. One thing that I do want to point out is that in the early days of the study of human development, most psychologists and researchers took one side of the debate or the other. Today, and this is very important to note, most developmental psychologists take what's referred to as an interactionist approach, which just means that we acknowledge that there are concepts that fall on both sides of the debate, or that both sides of the debate can affect our development in the different domains. So the first debate is nature versus nurture, and this refers to the consideration of what is more important on development: our nature, which is basically our biology and our genetics, or the environment. The next debate is continuity versus discontinuity. So the debate here includes the fact that what or how does development occur? Does it occur in continuous stage? Does it occur continuously, or does it occur discontinuously in stages? Meaning that different events have to occur at different stages in order for the person to advance to the next stage. And again, continuity just means that the development occurs continuously without stages. The third debate refers to changes, or refers to the individual being active in their own development. So do they have to do things and interact with the environment in order for the developmental changes to occur? Or could they just sit back and be passive and the changes will occur anyway? And then the final debate, stability versus change, refers to those things that and those characteristics or aspects of ourselves that remain stable over the course of our lifetime versus those that will change as we get older. And again, as I said at the start of this slide, most agree on the interactionist approach, that there are some things that are more influenced by nature, there are others that are more influenced by nurture. There are some aspects of development where we need to be active in bringing about that change, whereas there are others where we need to be more passive. So now let's take a look at some of the historical theories on development. And most of these, at least the first few that I have listed up here, go back to some early philosophers. Now, the preformationist view was actually a view that was pretty prominent until the 18th century. And this is the belief that there was a tiny, fully formed human that was implanted in the fertilized egg during conception that just continued to grow in size until birth. So basically, when the sperm fertilized the egg, the little baby was there and it just kept getting bigger and bigger. This theory does not believe in the, when we go through the prenatal development, the formation of the zygote, the rapid development, and then the three prenatal development stages, which include the embryonic stage, the fetal stage, and all of the other changes that are occurring on the cellular level. Now, John Locke believed that children were shaped by their social environment. He believed that children come into this world not knowing anything, something that he referred to as the tabula rasa, or the blank slate, and that as children interact with their social environment, they begin to develop different abilities. Now, Rousseau believed that children were not little adults and that they were not blank slates, but rather he believed that they were born and develop according to a natural plan. And then finally, Arnold Giselle proposed that we have development occurring as a result of maturation. And child's development is governed by genes that activate the different changes that occur during the developmental process. Now let's take a look at one of the early psychology theories on human development, and that is Sigmund Freud's psychosexual theory. Now, Freud believed that who we are as adults is a result of our ego's ability to resolve conflicts during the first few years of life. He believed that a lot of our growth and development was influenced by psychosexual growth. And in his theory of psychosexual theory, he proposed that we go through 5 different stages. The first stage is the oral stage, which occurs during the first 18 months or so of life. And in this stage, the mouth is the organ that is of focus. Freud believed that if children's oral needs are met by their caregiver, and basically this just means that they were being fed, then their ego at this point would continue to develop appropriately. If the oral needs were not met, so if the baby was neglected in any way, Freud believed that as an adult, the child would have flaws in their adult personality. So this can include things like having an addictive personality. The second stage is the anal stage, and the key task here for young children between the ages of about 18 months and 3 years of age is toilet training, and that's why the anus is the body part that is of focus. Now, Freud believed that if the parents were too harsh or too lax with toilet training, again, the ego would not develop appropriately. The child would become fixated at this stage, and fixated is the term that Freud used to refer to any time the child's development did not occur the way that it should. So fixated just means that they're stuck at this stage, and as a result, they would have different flaws in their adult personality. So with any overly harsh or too lax of a toilet training process, Freud believed that the child could grow up to be anal retentive and perhaps have issues with obsessive compulsive personality disorder, or even the anxiety disorder known as obsessive compulsive disorder, or they can be what Freud referred to as anal explosive. And this means that they could have problems with impulsive behaviors and so forth. The third stage is the phallic stage, and this occurs between the ages of 3 and 6. It is referred to the phallic stage because usually around the age of 3, this is when children begin to understand the differences between males and females. In this stage, Freud believed that boys go through the Oedipus complex and girls go through the Electra complex. Freud believed that during the Oedipus complex, boys start to fall in love with their mothers, but their superego knows that that is wrong. So in order to overcome that, the boys will start to identify with their fathers, and then they will start to learn appropriate behaviors. And the Electra complex is the process that girls go through. During the latent stage, okay, which is basically the elementary school years between 6 and 12, not much is going on in terms of sexual development. That's why it's referred to as the latent stage. And then once puberty begins, usually around, well, at least in Freud's day, it was around the age of 12, the child moves into the genital stage, and this is when they start to develop an interest in a sexual partner. And Freud believed that if the first 3 stages were navigated through successfully, then they would be able to have healthy relationships as an adult. The next theory is also a psychoanalytic theory, but this one is based on the work of Erik Erikson. Now, Erikson believed that we go through 8 different stages throughout the course of our development. But unlike Freud, who said we go through psychosexual crises, Erikson believed we go through psychosocial crises. So in the trust versus mistrust crisis, for example, the key task here is for the infant to learn how to trust. And since an infant cannot do anything for themselves, they have to rely on their caregivers to do everything for them. If their caregivers do not provide for them, the infant would not develop that sense of trust, and they would go on having difficulty trusting others in the future. The other stages include autonomy versus shame and doubt, which occurs in early childhood from about 1.5 to 3 years. And this is where children become independent, where they start walking and realize that their behavior is their own and that they don't have to rely on their parents for everything. So children do need to develop that sense of autonomy to go out and explore the world, as long as it's safe for them to do so. Otherwise, if parents prevent them, Erikson believed they would develop feelings of shame and doubt. In initiative versus guilt, the key goal here is to be able to develop purposeful social interactions. In industry versus inferiority, this is the elementary school years. Industry refers to all of those skills that we learn as we are moving through elementary school. So things like reading, writing, learning about music, art, and so forth. And then when we reach adolescence, we are trying to figure out who we are, where we're going in life, what we want to do with the rest of our life. And then in young adulthood, the goal is to form an intimate relationship with another person. In middle adulthood, the goal is to give back to the younger generations. And then finally, in the last stage, we review our life. And if we feel it was a life that was well lived, Erikson believed that we would die with a sense of ego integrity. The next contemporary theory is Albert Bandura's social learning theory. And this is based on the idea that there are 3 parts that determine our human behavior. And this is what Bandura referred to as reciprocal determinism. So all of these interact with one another, and they include our cognitive factors or our personal factors. These can also include our psyche, our behavioral factors, Okay, so things that we do, things that are outward behaviors, and then the environment. And Bandura believed that if there was a change in any of these three, the other two would have to change, and then we would see a change in the person's development. Now over here, I also have Bandura's the key components in Bandura's social learning theory, which in part is based on operant conditioning. But the difference for Bandura is that he believed that if the organism, and this just doesn't apply to humans because it can occur in animals as well. So if the organism has the ability to focus and pay attention, if they have the purpose to store in memory what they've seen, and then if they have the ability to reproduce what they've seen, based upon whether or not they receive punishments or reinforcements, that's going to motivate them to repeat the behavior. And this theory is based on his classic Bobo doll experiment, which you learned about in your previous course. And then the last theories that or not the last, but the next theory that I wanted to point out here are the cognitive theories. And the two cognitive theories are actually two different ones that were developed closely around the same time. The first is based upon Jean Piaget, who was a Swiss psychologist who, through observations of children, developed his theory based on 4 distinct stages that we go through in our development. And these include the sensory motor stage, in which the child is learning about their environment and developing through their senses and their movements. And this occurs during the first 2 years of life. In the pre-operational stage, the child starts to use symbolic thought. A couple of other things that also happen here include the development of conservation, or the ability to understand that an object, the amount of matter stays the same even if its shape changes, and this occurs at the end of the pre-operational stage. In the concrete operational stage, the child begins to use some very primitive reasoning and logic. And then they also start to develop the use of operations, which Piaget defined as the ability to do things mentally and knowing what the outcome will be without actually having to do them. And then in formal operations, this is when we have the ability to use hypothetical deductive reasoning. Now, Lev Vygotsky, on the other hand, did not have a stage theory. Both of these theories are interactionist theories, which believe that the child plays an active role in influencing their development. Vygotsky believed that culture and language were essential to the child's development. He believed that cognitive development works best when the child learns from peers who are slightly more skilled. And what I have here is a picture of what Vygotsky referred to the zone of proximal development. And this is where we want the child to be introduced to tasks that are slightly too difficult for them to do on their own, where they might need some slight assistance to help them. If they need more assistance, or they can't do it at all, then that's what Vygotsky referred to as being outside of their ZPD, or zone of proximal development. The next theory is the information processing theory, which just is an integrative approach that studies how we perceive, analyze, manipulate, and remember information. And I have a picture of a computer here because the information processing approach developed out of the development of the computer back in the 1940s and 1950s. So as developmentalists started to see how computers were inputting, processing, and outputting information, they started to realize that our human body was kind of the same way. And part of information processing theory does also involve the study of how we use language, how memory works, how our metacognitive skills work, and so forth. One of the ecological theories is Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. And Bronfenbrenner believed that there are a number of different systems in which we live that affect our development. So at the center, we have the individual, and certainly one's sex, age, and health can affect development, but also the immediate systems outside of them. So the first one is the microsystem, and these are the systems that have an immediate effect or interaction with the individual. So these can include our family, our schools, our peers. When two or more microsystems interact, we have a mesosystem. So when parents go to school for parent-teacher conference, that's a mesosystem. Now, the exosystem includes things that can influence the development of a child, but that the child may not have direct interaction with. So these can include things like the free lunches at school or public health policies such as vaccines. The macro system includes the culture. So we defined culture earlier in this lecture, and culture, the beliefs and attitudes of the culture, can certainly affect the individual. And finally, the last system is the chronosystem, which refers to the historical events that can affect the development of the individual. Now, with any area of psychology, we have to talk about research. Okay, so psychology is science, and the goals of psychology are to explain, predict, and change. And the same holds true in developmental psychology. So just like in other areas of psychology, we can do descriptive research, which includes case studies, observations, and interviews. We can do correlational research, which is where we look at how variables are related. But remember, correlation does not mean causation. If we want to find out if, in fact, different variables affect one another, then we would do an experiment. So an experiment occurs when we change one variable, okay, which is referred to as the independent variable, to determine whether or not it will affect another variable, which is referred to the dependent variable. So in experimental research, we have an experimental group which receives the treatment or the independent variable. And then we have the control group, which does not receive the independent variable. Now, there are some specific types of research that are done when it comes to developmental psychology. Because we are looking at changes that occur across the lifespan, we can do cross-sectional research, and this is where we observe individuals of different age groups at the same point in time. This can be very appropriate if we needed to find information out quickly. However, one of the biggest downfalls to doing cross-sectional research is that individuals in different developmental periods may not have had the same experiences, especially some of the historical experiences that the others may have had. So if you look at individuals in their 90s today who have lived through World War II, they have not had the same experiences as 5-year-olds today who know how to use computers before they even get to school. So if we wanted to overcome that, one of the types of studies we can do is a longitudinal research, and this is where we take the same individuals and study whatever phenomena we want to study over the course of their lifetime. So this is certainly research that takes a very long time to do. It's very costly, but we can still eliminate confounding variables that may occur across different developmental periods. And then sequential research is a combination of using a cross-sectional and longitudinal research studies. Now, I'm not going to go over in detail ethics, but rather I just don't want you to forget that we do have to follow the ethical code. We cannot harm any of our participants when we do studies. Our participants do have to give consent to participate. They also do have the right to leave at any time. So I have a link here to the ethics code, which you can take a look at if you want a little bit more detail than what's presented in your textbook. So that leads us back to our essential question. Hopefully the information in this chapter gave you some food for thought, and perhaps you're thinking, what, if any, factor has the most influence on human development? Thank you for watching. This concludes the lecture.